Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar in the latest in our Educator Effectiveness webinar series. Today, we're here to discuss educator effectiveness and creating and sustaining professional learning communities. As it was mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Greniger. I'm today's webinar facilitator. Joining me, I have today Stephanie Hirsch, who is the Executive Director of Learning Forward, along with Michael Kozak, who is a representative from the Rel Mid-Atlantic Professional Learning Research Alliance, and also the Superintendent of Schools in Monroe Township District in New Jersey. I'll talk a little bit about their background in just a moment, but before I do that, I'd like to find out who all of you are. In just a moment, you'll see a poll come up on your screen, and we'd like to see the role that you fill in your school or district or outside of a school in a support position. Happy to see such a large group with us today. We know it's a busy time of year, so we appreciate you taking the time and joining us on this important topic. Looks like a diverse audience. We have folks really covering the range of roles, and that's wonderful because you'll hear a lot about how each of those distinct roles that you might serve. Through today's webinar, there is information on how in your position you might be able to make changes and implement PLCs. If you aren't doing so already, how you can start them, and if you are doing them, how you might be able to improve and enhance your work. So we're excited you're all here. Glad to see such a diverse audience. All right, we'll take that poll away and I will get down to business. Today I have our featured presenter, Dr. Stephanie Hirsch. Stephanie joins us from Learning Forward. She is currently the Executive Director there. Stephanie has been involved in a lot of different roles in her career, as first a secondary teacher, later serving as a school district administrator in the Richardson, Texas ISD, and has served 3 terms also in the Richardson School Board. In her role at Learning Forward, if you're not familiar, is an organization with over 12,000 members committed to increasing student achievement and educator effectiveness through standards-based professional learning. In her role there, she has co-authored several reports and publications focused on professional learning communities, including the Learning Forward Standards for Professional Learning, and she's been an advocate for professional learning communities in federal law and guidance, standards for professional learning, and improved practice in schools. She also serves on the boards of the Learning First Alliance and Advanced ED, and she received her PhD from the University of North Texas. Also joining us today is Dr. Michael Kozak. Michael Kozak is the Superintendent of Schools in Monroe Township School District in New Jersey. He comes to us with over 20 years of experience as an educator, first as a classroom teacher, assistant principal, principal, and superintendent in various districts. He is the representative for the Rel Mid-Atlantic's Professional Learning Research Alliance and is going to share some of the details from that work with us today and also give us some of that on-the-ground experience from leading PLCs at the district level and making those changes at his district currently. Michael received his EDD in Educational Leadership from Rowan University in New Jersey. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Stephanie, who will take us through the beginning part of our webinar for today. Stephanie? Just make sure you're unmuted, and want to make sure we can hear you, Stephanie.
Oh, thank you. I was having a great conversation with myself. Sorry about that. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this afternoon, and I look forward to a wonderful conversation about one of my favorite subjects in education, PLCs. So in terms of our outcomes that we've established for these couple of hours together, we will review the research, the foundation for our focus on PLCs and what we now know to some degree about their connection to student outcomes. I noticed in the list of attendees when you were identifying where you came from, a lot of people identified themselves as researchers. This is definitely a field that can use some additional research, so excited to see so many researchers. Secondly, different research has identified different critical components of effective PLCs, and so we'll look at those, some of the areas where there's commonality and some of the things that are surfacing more recently. And third thing is we'll really pay attention to what are the actions that are involved in launching, supporting, and as many of you asked in your questions, maintaining and documenting and communicating the effects of PLCs. So that's our overall objectives for today. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm Executive Director at Learning Forward. I hope many of you in the room are familiar with the organization. I hope even many more of you are actually members of the organization. We have a vision that's all about excellent teaching and learning every day. And our mission is all about building the capacity of leaders to establish and sustain highly effective professional learning. I invite you to go to our website, learningforward.org. I'll mention lots of resources throughout the webinar that are freely available to you because of our advocacy for professional learning. So let me start out with some assumptions that, and I must admit, these are assumptions that at Learning Forward that we hold about PLCs. And I know all of your experiences with PLCs have probably been very different. And so you may not hold the same assumptions that we hold, but I ask you to consider while I talk briefly about these, if it isn't an assumption that you hold, then maybe what's the counter assumption that you hold as well, and maybe you'll have some comment in the comment box or the parking lot box about how you might rewrite that assumption to represent what you hold to be true about PLCs. And these are kind of assumptions that I think are essential if PLCs are really to deliver on their promise. So in terms of the first one, we hold that PLCs need to be focused on the learning for both the participants in the PLC as well as ultimately the goal is to impact the learning of students. Secondly, that for all students to learn, PLCs need to involve all the adults in the organization. And one thing that we hold to be true is that the most powerful PLCs occur during the routine work day, that they aren't something that happen by accident or by invitation outside the school day. While we can belong to PLCs that connect us to colleagues in a variety of venues, the most powerful ones are those that occur with our colleagues within the school so that we impact the quality of teaching and learning for all students within our school every day. Number three, PLC work is intentional work. It's about setting learning goals based on information that we have about our students and what we need to learn as adults so that our students are successful in achieving the goals that we set for them. And here's a few more for you to consider. PLCs do work interdependently, but ultimately the most powerful PLCs in schools are aligned with the goals that we've set at the school level, the goals that we have as team members, and the goals that we set for our students, and there's a certain degree of coherence that works across the work of all PLCs. The fifth assumption is that all PLCs, engage in some sort of pre-designed cycle of improvement or cycle of inquiry. And what's really important within that cycle, no matter which cycle you adopt, is the focus on intentional learning. That learning is an input in the PLC. It's not an it's an output as well as an input. And then finally, that effective PLCs are able to focus on and report on measurable outcomes. So those are 6 assumptions that we hold. I'm in the process of writing a book about this, and as you can see the citation there, and it'll be coming out this fall, and that's kind of from where we launch our work. So let's talk a little bit about the research base that is the foundation for, I think, so many people's work in PLCs. Some of the people who have contributed to this that help us all get smarter about how we implement the PLC framework. So I'm a huge fan of Shirley Hord, who I think is really responsible for the seminal research on PLCs dating back to the 1990s, and the work that she did while she worked at CETL. And in her early assessment of what contributed to professional learning communities that were demonstrating impact on changing educators' practice, she identified these 5 core elements. And if you have followed Shirley's work over the last 3 decades, you also know that she continues to refine from this original list. And later on in the webinar, we'll look at the list that she refers to today. Another key source of the research and people who have given us a lot of information about what makes for effective PLCs are Lieberman and Miller. They've written a lot about this over the years. In this particular citation, this particular work that you can find in the list of resources, very lengthy list of resources at the end of this webinar, in this particular piece, they offer their research-based framework for what are the essential conditions, components of PLCs. And they also invited practitioners to tell their stories about their PLCs that fit within that framework and reinforce that framework as well. People often ask me for the definitive study in professional development, like, will you please prove it works? You know, give us the study that proves it for everyone. And so I have a few that I refer to depending on the context in which I'm talking. And one of my favorites in terms of PLC work and professional learning teams was the 2009 study by Saunders, Goldenberg, and Gallimore that's been written up in a lot of journals since then as well. It's pretty definitive because of the size of the group. They looked at Title I schools. I believe there were over 1,300, 1,500 students that were included in the studies. They looked at grade level meetings, and this was one, and I know one of you asked, were any of the studies tied to student achievement scores on state tests? And this is one of those that actually did show gains in student achievement based on the level of engagement in the PLC and the fact that there was that they could see evidence of fidelity of practice aligned with the most important actions within PLC. So if you want to look at the study that's kind of the definitive study, I recommend that you go to the resource page and look at this one as well. And then here's another interesting study that I came across while I was actually preparing for the webinar and hadn't looked at this one in a long time. And so this is a study that actually came out of the United Kingdom. And for those of you that are interested in all of the research behind PLCs, here's another one that's worth looking at and seeing what they learned as well. Then in addition to those research studies, we have a lot of information from the field that about what teachers tell us about the importance of collaborative learning, the impact that collaborative learning has on them as individuals, and in terms of just the degree of career satisfaction, which can then lead to whether we successfully retain great teachers in the profession. So this was a statistic that came out of the 2009 MetLife study of the American teacher. What's also interesting is that in 2014, Boston Consulting released a study that was called Teachers Know Best, and it was a study of teachers about what professional learning they valued most. And we were really disappointed to see that among a list of the kinds of offerings, experiences that are available to teachers, that PLCs in this particular study was identified second to the bottom. Some of you may remember that study. And so when we dug deeper into the data and we talked more with teachers, what we found out was the fact that, in many cases, PLCs were being hijacked by administrators in schools, and meetings were being called PLCs in name only. And so I think that's why it's always really important for us to go back to what are those critical elements that make a PLC, and that we help educators, raise their voices when things are being tagged as PLCs and they aren't PLCs, because pretty soon, PLCs overall will get dismissed as something important in education because we have so little evidence that it's having any impact on our practice or our students. So I just bring that to your attention as one thing to keep in mind as we talk about, what do we know about PLCs and the most successful ones, the elements of successful PLCs. So it's probably a good time for me to turn it back to Elizabeth so we can learn about your experience.
Very good. Thank you, Stephanie, for that research overview. It's exciting to hear about the work that's been done, but the most exciting part is to come. So we're going to hear more about the current practice and theory that you're going to share with us. But before we do that, we want to hear from our audience today and get a sense of what your experiences are, the successes and challenges you have had with PLCs thus far. So we'll put up a poll box. This is open-ended, so you can just type in your responses, share some examples of success challenges you've had. While we do that, I'll just do a couple quick housekeeping items. I know some folks were having some technical issues. I think most of those got settled. But if you do have something that comes up through the webinar, you see the little box at the bottom where you can post that question or concern, and one of our team members will help you with that. The parking lot's there on the left, and I see folks are already introducing themselves, which is great. If you do have questions for Stephanie or Mike as we go through the presentation today, please post them there. We have a long list of questions that you all asked as you registered, and we're going to get to as many of those as we can. And we want to hear from you, so there's going to be plenty of opportunities for you to answer some of our questions and to converse with one another on the topics that we're discussing today. So here we go, lots of successes and challenges coming in.
Oh, yeah.
A challenge that we expect and we know is really high on the list for folks, having the time to get it started and to keep it going, to keep that momentum. Along with that, and I know Stephanie, you'll talk a bit about this, and Mike has some on-the-ground experiences to share about how to make this a priority in terms of scheduling.
It's good to see so many people who can report about success. So that's affirming that it can be done. that with all the challenges everybody's having, that we see so many places that are experiencing success with it. So we know they've been able to overcome a lot of these obstacles. It's kind of learning from the field about how they do these. And I'll mention, and then we'll put up later, some other resources that, in particular, that will help with that time question, because we get that all the time, so we put together some guidance for it. And we have lots of stories of schools in this one, and systems of how they've created time, creatively, but also it's during the school day.
And I see a couple of comments that lead to a discussion that Stephanie, Mike, and I were having before today's webinar, some specificity with, we're a small district, we address these subjects or these grades, versus we're a statewide program. So different sizes and contexts of your groups that you're attempting to work with, and we'll talk a little bit about that and how to make the principles of PLCs work for the group that you're addressing. Michael, I don't know if there's anything that jumps out at you here in terms of the experiences folks are having and some of the work that you're going to share with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm jotting notes down as I'm watching the questions fly by. And I'm going to just hopefully be able to address a lot of these themes that I'm seeing. And I'll just run down some of the themes that I've picked up on so far. Fear, vulnerability for engaging in a PLC, trust, time, a hijacking of the PLC, funding, sustaining a PLC through the year, how do you measure success, and engagement. So I won't answer any of those questions right now, but during my part of the presentation, I certainly am going to try to speak to each of those issues.
Wonderful. We'll give you all about 30 more seconds to type in some responses. I'll also note that this is really helpful to see all these examples, and I'm sure you're finding that as well, to see this sharing among your colleagues across the states. We will make this available as an archive, so you'll, in a few weeks after the event, you'll get an email that indicates that there's materials posted from today's event, and so you'll have a listing of these ideas, and hopefully it will help you in your work.
You know, one of the things that we say about PLCs is so much of the expertise is within the group, and PLCs allow us the process for identifying, elevating, and spreading that expertise. And I recognize a lot of wonderful names and people who are in the webinar today who I know have their own success stories and their own great resources. And so I invite you during the webinar to, give us the citations for your own work and for the resources that are most helpful to you as you facilitate PLCs in your work. So it's great to see a lot of Learning Forward colleagues attending today, and want to thank you for that as well. Should I go forward?
Yes, we'll pull this poll off, and we'll get into the next section. Stephanie, you can talk us through some of the current theory.
Okay, so it's a little challenging to make the distinction between research and theory, but I guess if somebody has pulled together the research and now they put forward their theory, then I will qualify it as that. So as I mentioned to you, Shirley Hord began this original work in 1997. A piece that she wrote in 2004 really continues to drive how we talk about the essential elements of learning communities. And so this is just one that I want to spend a little bit more time talking about. And some of you may be familiar with this book. It was Learning Together and Leading Together, Changing Schools Through PLCs. And in the first part of the book, she talks about these essential conditions. And then in the second part of the book, again, what I love about this book and the one by Lieberman and Miller is the fact that we have then practitioners describe their work within PLCs and how it aligns to those essential conditions. So For those of you that know this in a deep way, allow me just a few minutes for those who are just a little less familiar with PLCs to kind of provide a little bit of explanation for each one of those conditions. So in terms of the supportive and shared leadership, and I know a lot of you are interested in the role of the principal, and we'll touch on that later, but here's a place to think about it as well, that this means that the leadership within the school or the leadership within the system responsible for the professional learning community recognizes the importance of the collegial and facilitative participation of the principal. The principal shares leadership, which ultimately means shares power and authority when it comes to the PLC. And the principal is very deliberate in inviting the staff input and action in decision making. So you can see at the school level that there typically is kind of the school leadership team that operates, in a PLC framework, and then there are the PLC teams that either are grade level or department level, or they can be vertical, horizontal. It just depends on the priorities that have been identified for the school, and then ultimately the best structure for teachers to align their learning with those priorities. There's also the notion of the collective learning and the application of learning. It requires that school staff at all levels are engaged in processes where they collectively seek new knowledge. And then even more important than learning together is the commitment to applying the new knowledge to the problems that they've identified and ultimately addressing their student needs. There's also the importance of, I'm sure everybody would agree with, of shared values and vision. Having that shared vision of what we want for the school, what we want education to look like for our students. We all know the power of having that, so that we know our PLCs are aimed at making that a reality for every student. And within that vision, there equally should be a part that addresses, and what do we want it to look like in terms of educator learning? And then what are the values that we hold together about the way that we're going to work together, as well as the way that we will proceed in achieving that vision. There's also all the parts about the conditions that are necessary to do this work. The structural conditions about where we work, the space we have to work in, and then the time we have to work, when is it scheduled, and is it not at the end of the school day, so when we are exhausted, and do we have enough time to accomplish everything that we want to accomplish within our PLC. And then also, how do we establish the great relationships that are absolutely essential if we're going to admit our vulnerabilities, recognize that we do have something we need to learn, and are going to support each other in that learning. And then finally, just this whole notion of this is about building a common language, a common set of strategies. It's about ensuring great practices spread from classroom to classroom. It's about being open and transparent about our practice, and being open to peer support and feedback and assistance. So I went a little long on those. I promise not to do that again for a while. The next thing that many of you are probably familiar with are the Learning Forward standards. And the very first standard is the Learning Community Standard. And for me, I tell everyone, if you want to see a great narrative or a great vision statement about a learning community, I really think the narrative attached to our standard just offers you what I think I would want for every school. And it's on the website. We'll give you the link. It's totally a free material, and I think it creates a powerful story about what learning communities look like in schools. When we wrote each one of our standard statements, we looked at the critical components. And so within a learning community, the way we define it is that commitment to continuous improvement, this is an ongoing cycle you see in schools, that really strong learning communities are aligned among the individual team, school, and system goals. There's accountability for the work that occurs within learning communities, and ultimately there's collective responsibility for the success not only of all the students represented by the community, but all of the members of the community themselves. So let's see how well you've been listening. Elizabeth?
Yes, we are going to do something a little different than we've done in some of our past webinars, and we're going to get you to interact with us over a series of true-false questions that are up and coming, and we'll have Stephanie and Mike talk us through the correct answers, if there is one, for each of these, and talk us through some of their experiences as it relates to these questions. So as Stephanie said, we've really covered a lot so far, and we want to see what you've learned or what you might already know. And this is a no-pressure situation, so feel free to just answer your initial instinct, and we're going to talk through each of these statements. So the first one, I'll read it, and then you'll see a box pop up, and you'll have the true-false options to select. We are interested in finding out, as the person responsible for the school, the principal provides leadership by consistently directing the community throughout all of its work. Is that true or false? Overwhelmingly, folks believe this is false.
Because we have a very smart audience.
Exactly. So I'll say a couple of things about that statement, and then Mike, you can talk about it in the context of your school system as well, and the role of the principal. I think what we were focusing on with this statement was that word directing, because it's really not the role of the principal to direct the work of the PLC. The role of the principal, I think, as I tried to state before from the research, was about building a school culture that's about shared and collaborative leadership. Other responsibilities that I think are an important part of the role of the principal include being a really good advocate for collaborative learning, understanding why that you're asking people to engage in PLCs, and being able to explain that to your community. And finding that time during the school day, facilitating a process that allows people to create the schedule that works best for them, developing leaders within the school for the PLCs. I noticed Alexander's question about, well, I've been given the PLC, but nobody's told me how I'm supposed to lead this. Well, that's another kind of problem. If you identify leaders for PLCs, but you don't invest and build the capacity of those so that they ultimately can lead to be self-governing organizations. And then also responsibility of principals making sure PLCs have the data to drive the decisions that they're going to make about the priorities they set. Mike, what else do you think of in terms of the role of the principal?
Well, the first thing you mentioned for the Learning For It was to engage in continuous improvement. And I would take that applies to everyone in the school, not just the teachers. So I would encourage the principals to engage in their own PLC, an administrative PLC, so that they can see the value of that. And as you said, allocating time for collaboration during the school day, there's ways to do that. I have teachers in the district that meet before school, during common planning time, after school, and to that notion where there may be people in the audience who feel they're not sure how to get started or how to go about doing this. I've always been a person that I don't dip my toes into the pool, I dive right in. So I would encourage those people to dive in to while they're exploring this, to examine the resources that are out there, the research base, become a member of Learning Forward. And even if they have to learn as they go, so that at least they can get started with us.
So Elizabeth, are we ready for the next question?
We are. I will get us to that slide, and the next statement is the PLC team could be found meeting monthly in a section of the cafeteria during the lunch period to share instructional strategies and, in quotes, neat activities for students. We want to know if you believe that is true or false. So this speaks to scheduling and purpose, and looks like many of you feel that that is false. Very good.
Right. We have the advanced group. So
Absolutely.
let me talk a little bit about that question and just some of the reasons that we put it up there and the distinctions that we wanted to make. First of all, I really believe that the amount of learning and application and success of a PLC is directly tied to the investment that we can make in time for PLCs and the PLC's commitment to learning. And if a district is only able, or a school is only able to start with maybe time set aside on a monthly basis, then the goal, almost has to be right-sized for what you can accomplish if you're only meeting on a monthly basis. If you right-size it and you experience success, it also builds momentum and appetite for going back to the schedule and even looking for more time. But if you expect great things with just a small monthly investment, you will be disappointed by those results. In terms of when we talked about supportive physical conditions, I wouldn't call a corner of the cafeteria a supportive physical condition. And while sharing of neat activities, okay, so networking is valuable, and getting great strategies from colleagues, we do that online. We do that in a lot of venues, but that is not equivalent to a PLC. A PLC is being intentional about learning. As Shirley Hort always says, it's professionals learning in collaboration. Or it's professionals collaborating for the purpose of learning. Let me get that right. Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think you covered it pretty well, Stephanie, but the only thing I would add is, again, the importance of that continued learning. I think any one of us would run screaming from a doctor's office if the last time our doctor picked up a medical journal was 1990 or 1980. So I think just for everyone in the organization to understand the importance of professional learning and to allocate the time, the location, and the resources necessary is very important for schools to be high achieving.
Very good. Let's move on to the next one, Statement 3. Statement 3 says the team is provided a location conducive to serious interaction, resources including data and readily understood formats from multiple sources, and time to meet daily or weekly at a minimum are identified for community meetings. Do you believe this is true or false? Well, no doubt about that. We all agree
Right.
that is true.
Okay, well, that's a good one. It's kind of a reinforcement of the last question. We have evidence of the physical structural conditions for support. We have evidence of a process in place, some sort of cycle of improvement, and we have evidence of time. So many of the things that are really important for PLCs. So that one's pretty obvious, but hopefully and obviously everybody got it right. So maybe we should move on from that one.
Can I just add one thing to that? There was a statement about data being accessible, and just to share what we use in the Monroe Township School District, that the data is accessible through easily accessible formats, including shared drives, and beginning this year we're using a data warehousing system called Performance Matters. I just think it's important that teachers have that access to the student data or whatever data it is that they're collecting in an easily user-friendly manner. So we can move on to the next one. I just want to include that one part about the data.
Thank you. Very good, Michael. And I know we're going to get back to that point in systems and accessing information and how that's done in different places. So thanks for adding that piece. Statement 4 says PLC community members are careful about being too open with their ideas and strategies for fear of offending their less capable colleagues. Do you believe that is true or false? For the most part, I think that is false.
Yeah.
We'll move that off and talk you through that one.
Okay, so it is false. I think if we were giving prizes out, we would have to give lots of prizes at the end of this quiz. So I think we have to be really careful that our work is not based on fear, but it really is grounded in the data, as well as the research and evidence. A recognition that's really important within all PLCs. It's probably one of the values that we might even identify as a school, that everyone has certain strengths, and at one time or another will be the person who brings expertise to the group, and that we will all have areas for growth. And ultimately our goal is about, that collective responsibility for the success of every educator and every student represented by the PLC. So, Mike, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer in that relationship of trust. I believe that was either Roland Barthes or Warren Bennis or Sergio Giovanni. Somebody had mentioned that. And it's the way I like to to have my involvement in a school district. And to that point, I think that our teachers that are maybe more experienced and to have the knowledge in their role as teacher leaders need to encourage some of maybe our newer teachers or less experienced teachers or less knowledgeable teachers to, not be afraid to come in and express their thoughts and to learn and to make it a collaborative learning environment. That trust is just so important for any organization, but especially a school district, to be successful.
Great. Next question.
Next question.
Oops. I'm sorry.
Don't look.
To address identified educator learning needs, the members share solutions as well as solicit assistance from other communities, experts, or research so they learn more effective practices to use with their students. Do you think that is true or false?
Wow, it's amazing.
Very good. So another resoundingly true response, set of responses. We will talk through that one.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of things I want to point out is that during the PLC cycle or cycle of improvement, whatever a PLC adopts, there's always a point at which the team has to consider the various potential solutions to the problem and the goal that it's identified. And what I want everyone to be mindful of is that a big part of the first part of the answer to that is what do we need to learn in order to overcome this problem or to achieve this goal, and then how will we learn it? So first, clarifying what are we going to learn, how will we learn it, and then once you get to that question of how will we learn it, there are, we'll often look inside first to see if expertise exists within the group, and that's when if a group really trusts each other and they have data about their students' performance that year or even the previous year on the objectives that they're trying to address at that time, then they're going to be able to determine who among them had real success and can maybe teach what they did. And if none of them had the success that they were seeking, then at that point is the most appropriate time in the cycle to begin to look outside the group for others who have had experience and success and have the expertise to help them address that priority. Is that how it works for you all, Mike?
Yes, and I'd like to add to that as well. One of the questions that was sent in ahead of time was in regard to social media, and I've been a member of Twitter since, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, I think, ever since Twitter came out. And I use that as a somewhat of a professional learning community, and there are groups within Twitter that you can join. Also, LinkedIn has now jumped on that as well. So there are educator groups out there that you can become a member of and participate with people outside of your school district. Also, my work and others with, before I say this, I think that all leadership teams in schools and teachers, whoever can take part in it, should take part in the trainings with Learning Forward. I really think that was valuable. Our leadership team all went through the training with Learning Forward, and I think that really helped us. And also, for a number of years, I've been working with Dr. Cindy Blitz of Rutgers University with the REL MA, the Professional Learning Alliance, and we collaborate with educators in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland, both online and in person. It's a hybrid model, which I'll speak to later. And in the district, in the Monroe School District, right now, we're in the process of fostering relationships with universities and corporations to extend our available resources for our students and staff. So my point is that there are plenty of resources outside of the school district that educators can tap into that are very, very valuable. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Mike. That's really helpful in letting folks know that even if they are a small district or if they're in a place where PLCs have not really taken hold, that there are resources available for them. We have 2 more of these statements. So statement 6, community members respect and regard for each other, their interactions, and how they confront conflict, contribute to trust and to a smoothly functioning community. No shock. So, believe that
Yes,
is
I
true.
thought these were challenging. I thought they were challenging questions. Oh, yeah. Oh, well. So obviously this one is true, and it's actually, it raises that issue that many of you raised in questions that you submitted prior to the webinar, that, the essential notion that it's difficult to have a PLC if you don't have trust among the participants within the PLC. And yet, I really think the structures that PLCs can offer, when we're faithful to implementing according to the structures, that trust can be an outcome of that. I think trust also occurs when we collaborate and we see results, then we begin to trust the process, and then we begin to trust each other. But I know several of you asked, what are some intentional actions that you can take to build trust? So I'll give you 3 that I think are particularly helpful. We use these within my own organization as well, but we are real clear about our staff agreements, and within a PLC, sometimes those are called norms. We set down how we want to be treated by each other, and we hold each other accountable for when somebody violates a norm. One of those things that probably many of you can relate to is we have a norm within Learning Forward that we don't use email for a discussion or to tell somebody why we're angry with them. In fact, it's frowned upon deeply here. We also have a norm that says we will keep our promises. And when people don't keep their commitments and promises, we hold them accountable for that as well. So imagine the person who raised the question about, like, what about people within the PLC that doesn't fulfill their obligations? Well, the group has to get really good at revisiting norms and talking about how well we're doing, and also has to learn to develop that comfort in confronting someone when they don't meet their promises. I think something else that really helps build trust is to make sure that we spend time around that shared vision and those shared values. I think that allows us to know where people stand, and while we may not all have the same we may not all stand for the same thing, at least respecting the differences that we have is equally important. And then ultimately, part of the developing expertise in being able to participate in a high-functioning PLC is also our ability with language. How do we develop our own skillfulness around the language that we choose to use? And it's almost like learning some coaching skills allows us to do better in working with our colleagues and develop trust. Those are just 3 thoughts on that. Mike, you may have others, and I'll have a few more later on. Mike, what would you add to that? Because I know that's a big issue for people in the webinar today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with everything that you're saying. We have an online system that's part of a software called My Learning Plan. And when teachers or administrators propose a PLC, they submit a proposal, and it mentions SMART goals and things like that. But there's a part of the proposal that talks about norm setting. And we have different components that they have to fill out before their PLC will be approved, such as listening. How will the group encourage listening and discourage interrupting? Decision making. How will we make decisions? How will we deal with the conflicts? And participation. How will we encourage everyone's participation? What will be the roles and responsibilities of each PLC member? They're the kind of things that teachers, effective teachers, when they work with students to work in a small group setting, they go through and develop these norms in the classroom. And I think as adults, we need to model that behavior to our students. And I think that's very important that those norms are established and abided by.
Very helpful.
I like that model. Yeah, that's a great tool.
There's a good comment that Valerie made, just kind of an overall thought on this. So that while these true-false questions are not necessarily challenging to answer, actually implementation and enacting them in your districts, in your schools, in your settings is the challenge. So talking more through these examples and how it's been done, I think, is really the crux of what we're trying to do here, and ensuring that you all have some tools in your toolbox to go back and try to make your PLCs, get them started or make them better. So we have one more statement to go through. Number 7, community members are given opportunities to develop skills and take on leadership roles. They are enabled to share in power, authority, and decision making. That box pops up. Tell us if you think that's true or false. Another.
Well, that's affirmation. Everybody learned what we hoped they learned, right? At least we got to level 1 of effective professional learning. We've got the knowledge down, so that's good. With regard to this one, I would reinforce that, that PLCs are all about, building the capacity for leadership, learning, and growth. The professional learning standard, actually the second standard, is a standard on leadership, and within it, one of the critical components is leadership for supporting the continuous improvement cycle. And somebody asked this question early on, who are the right people to lead PLCs? It's teacher leaders who have been given the preparation and support to be able to lead them effectively. So we'll transition now into what does this look like in practice? And this will give you an opportunity to think about, as I describe one approach, to think about your own approach. So that this is not to say that this professional learning community cycle that I'm going to share with you is the answer to how to implement a professional learning cycle. It's a synthesis of all of the work that I've seen for my many years in professional learning. It kind of elevates what I think are some of the critical steps. And yet many of you I know, in fact, probably more of you in this webinar, most of you are probably familiar with Rick Dufour's work, and I think Rick Dufour made PLC the common word it is today, and is responsible for the movement and the growth of PLCs. And Rick has his approach is a really strong approach, embraced by everyone, and in the conversations we've had over the years, we care about the same pieces. We may describe the steps in different ways. A lot of you in your schools have done action research, and action research is another acceptable continuous improvement cycle. Many of you probably successfully have implemented lesson study, and lesson study basically follows this same cycle. And some of you mentioned community of practice, and recently we've been involved in launching 22 community of practices with very large school systems. And this cycle can work within a community of practice as well. It's just, there are a few things that are distinct within that. But again, it's just the way each one of us frames it. So within your own cycle of improvement, whatever you've adopted just for yourself, as I walk through this, think, how well do you fulfill kind of these commitments that allow you to get to the results that you seek? So we'll go from there, and we'll look at stage 1. And I refer to these as stages. The stages are not discrete, often overlapping. And how long it takes you to get through the cycle really depends. That goes back to the issue of time and how much time your school can allocate for you to engage in this deep type of work. So in stage 1, the team is really looking at the available data that you have to be able to set the goals for your learning team or your PLC. And depending on how much time you're going to have to work together, where you are in the course of the school year, what the goals that you're trying to set, are you trying to set them for a 6-week period of time? Are you trying to set them for a semester? Are you trying to set them for the school year? Will influence which data that you look at and how you determine what are the most important goals that you want to, what are the most important needs that you want to identify at this point. From all of this data, we have a process that we call writing summary statements. And obviously, this is an area where teachers often need, support in the beginning about how do you look at the data to interpret it and write these summary statements that will ultimately lead you to determining which are your most important goals. So I wonder what kind of support, Mike, do you guys have in your school system for helping teachers and teams interpret data to determine what are their highest needs?
Well, we use data at all levels of the organization. So our leadership team, we routinely incorporate data analysis in our leadership meetings, looking at student growth, student outcome. We have various ways to assess that. We have, as I mentioned before, performance matters, so that we have a platform that we can easily view and look at this data. Our principals also meet with their teachers and at various times, and they look at student outcome data throughout the year. And almost all of our professional development in the district, and we have, when we have 1,100 employees and probably about 800 of those are teachers, almost all of our professional development is done through professional learning communities. So many of those PLCs work on looking at data to inform their instruction.
That's great. So the next thing is we transfer the data into setting our goals. And again, the size of our goals depends on how often we meet and by when are we trying to achieve this particular goal. And in our view, the most powerful goals for the students are written in the SMART format. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with that. But then what many of the cycles of improvement lack is actually detailing what do the educators need to know and be able to do in order to successfully achieve the student goals. And so when it comes to writing educator learning outcomes, then we really encourage the teams to think about the CASABs. What new knowledge do they need? You know, are there any things with regard to attitude that we need to address? What skills do the members need? Are there certain aspirations that they want to write about? And what behavior changes do we expect? So always, you know, I think we're really good at identifying what do the students need to know and be able to do. I think the real challenge is, and I can tell you in writing this book, that was probably one of the biggest challenges, was taking student goals and then really breaking it down into then what will the educator learning really look like if we really are truly aligned to the student goals. So Mike, do you guys do anything with SMART goals, or how do you write your student goals, and how do you write your educator learning goals?
Yeah, actually we do use the SMART goal format for pretty much all of our goals. The teacher goals build off of the building level goals, which build off of the district goals, which are in alignment with the board goals. So we try to keep all of them integrated together. And you know, everything that you're mentioning on here, I think is very important, especially the knowledge, attitude, skills, aspirations, and behaviors, which can really impact how the PLCs work. But it is sometimes difficult to look at that student data and then determine how does that translate to an educator wanting to improve his or her skills.
Yeah, I mean that you've got like the alignment of all the goals right, but then often we look at what is the goal we have for the student, and then we jump to, so what can we do to reach that goal, and we don't identify what do we need to learn in order to be more successful at achieving that goal. Like we may have a content breakdown and we just don't know how to teach it. So it's just really going deep. That one step lower that we found is really helpful to learning communities. The next one then is, okay, now that we know what we need to know, then we've got to choose the right learning design based on the outcome. And several of you asked in the questions like, where is the autonomy of the team? When do they get to own their own learning? And what is the things that we have to follow, and what are the things around which we get to make decisions? And it really comes in this space right here in terms of the learning design. once you've determined what all of you within the group are going to learn, then there can be choices about how you learn it. The ultimate goal is, at this point, is that you're going to ultimately document that you learned it by transferring it into your practice. But one of the things that we know is that not all learning is created equal. And so selecting the right design that will lead to the intended change in practice is key as well. During the learn individually and collaboratively stage, there are multiple things happening. A, we're choosing our design and we're learning, and we have the opportunity, hopefully, to see it in practice, and we have the opportunity to practice. This is also the time when we are transferring our learning into lessons, because if we don't think about how these practices will influence what happens, well, transferring it into lessons is how we think deliberately about how our practice will influence how our new learning will influence our practice. And then finally, in terms of assessments here, I'm talking about formative assessments and how we will get that ongoing information from our students to say whether what we've learned and what we're applying is making any difference in the long run for our students. So in terms of how you all structure individual and collaborative learning and support for that in your district, Mike, what would you add to that?
Well, formative assessment's right up my alley. I'm a very strong believer in the formative assessment, but I also liked what you were saying about the individual and the collective learning, and I think that's just extremely important that everyone take the responsibility of continuing to advance their knowledge in either areas of weakness that they feel or areas that they could use improvement upon, and also continue learning to see what else is out there.
Yeah, you know, once you've identified the kind of what's the knowledge skills that we're all going to work on, we also all are at different levels within that. And so that's why allowing flexibility there in how we all get to the end goal is really important. And I think that's where we really honor the individual adult differences. So the fourth stage is, okay, we're all set up, now we're ready to put it into action. And this is where kind of the monitoring part of this we can begin to think about ultimately what monitoring and reporting will look like. But if we don't put this into action, then there really wasn't any reason to invest in PLCs to begin with. So during the implementation phase, we may actually invite peers to come in and watch us. We may invite coaches. We may videotape ourselves and reflect upon our practice. We might start by co-teaching a lesson, because if the strategies and the ideas are new, we may feel more comfortable in that way. And then we get a variety of feedback from our peers, from our coaches, from our own reflection. And let's not forget those formative assessments that tell us whether, you know, we're getting to the goal that we set for all of this to begin with. Mike, anything there? Do you all have coaches that provide support for change in the classroom?
We do. We actually we have teacher leaders that act as staff developers that help us develop professional development. We have coaches that work with teachers. We have reading specialists and math specialists. And we have a very strong mentoring program, and also for our new teachers, a very strong mentoring program for them, starting in the summertime and then continuing throughout the year. But, you know, one of the things that you were saying that just really resonates with me, and this is something that I struggled with, and I think a number of people struggle with over the years. You attend a workshop, you read a book, you engage in a professional learning community, and you have this knowledge, and it's burning, and you feel great about it, and then finding a way to actually apply that knowledge. And it to me, is very similar to what Grant Wiggins and others have talked about through understanding the design, but applying, you know, taking theory into practice. And if anybody's ever studied a musical instrument or have been a coach for a sports team, you know that you work on drills or you work on learning scales, but then you have to be able to apply that in a performance, either a recital or a game. And that's, to me, is one of the biggest challenges is, really forcing yourself to take this knowledge and actually go through and apply it. So I think that's a valuable part for a professional learning community, that they collaborate to make sure that people actually engage in that practice. And like you said, videotape it, maybe having people observe each other, but find a way to actually apply the knowledge.
That's why when we wrote this, we talk about how you need to build it into your lesson plan, because if you aren't intentional about that, it's not going to get used. And we know a lot of PLCs that try a lot of quick fixes, but really if you want something sustained, and I saw that question earlier, that if you want to make sure something's sustained, you've got to begin to build it into your long-term, like your lessons that you're going to retain over time. The last stage is really all about monitoring and adjusting practice, and this, recognizing this is a cycle of continuous improvement. This is a stage where you think about how are we going to monitor, and one of the tools that I love, and we don't have a lot of time today to talk about it, but we have, and we will post it after this as well, is what does teacher practice look like in a PLC? And we have what's called an innovation configuration that people who want to monitor a PLC, and is the PLC meeting the definition of a PLC, can use just to look at the behaviors that are occurring within it to see if the practices are consistent with what is defined as the effective characteristics of a PLC. When you're trying to implement new practices in your classroom, similarly, some programs, some strategies are accompanied by rubrics that you can look at, or learning progressions, to see where you are in terms of implementing the new practice. This is also where it's really critical that we're documenting our impact. If we expect people to continue to invest in PLCs, then we need to know how well did the students do. So what was that goal that we set, and how well did we achieve that goal based on what we're trying to implement, and that we share those results so that people know, in particular, if your district is investing time in PLCs, that these PLCs are the results that they're getting. Basically, this cycle is kind of our theory of action about how you get continuous improvement in schools, and this part of the cycle is all about, at this point, you're assessing where you were as a result of those goals. Did what you bet on in terms of your new learning, did it get results? Do you just need to adjust slightly for next year, or do you need to repeat the whole cycle, find a new intervention, something new to learn to get the results that you're really still trying to get? So it's iterative. It's about learning and improvement, and then it's all about, where do we go from here? So that's kind of the end of the cycle. I'm going to move forward a little bit and tell you all, we had a competition a few weeks ago all around teacher agency, and what do teachers want to tell us, how should the new dollars under ESSA for professional development, how should they best be allocated? And we had a number of teams submitted applications, and we chose 12 teams with really great ideas to give their state departments about how they'd like to see the money flow to support professional development at the local level. 2 of those teams talked about the power of their own cycle of inquiry, the power of collaborative learning. One was a district-wide recommendation from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and another one was within a school. There's 20 schools in New York City that are piloting cycles of inquiry this year, and this school, Murray Hill Academy, I think is further along than most. And they just make really compelling cases for organizing schools around these continuous improvement cycles. And I believe we're giving you the website where you can go watch these 4-minute videos, and I think they might be inspiring enough to start a conversation in your school. Some of the other videos may be as well, but unfortunately we can't show those to you today, but they're like 4 minutes, and we will give you that link at the end of the webinar. So one last study, and some of you asked about this. can you organize a PLC to address the needs of EL students? Can you organize it around students with disabilities? And so you may be interested in this study, and you may want to look it up in the reference list at the end, where these PLCs were organized specifically for that purpose, and as a result of focusing on that need that was identified by the data that the principals and teachers within the schools felt like they did a better job of serving the needs of the EL students and the students with disabilities. So several of you asked about a little bit about the role of the state education agency and policymakers and researchers. I think I mentioned a little earlier about the importance of researchers continuing to partnering with schools and districts around PLCs, continue to build the research base for us, and continue to elevate what works and what doesn't work, so that it informs policymakers and other decision makers about what we need to see in terms of support for PLCs. Michael Fullen says, that we all have responsibilities for successful PLCs. There are responsibilities at the school level, building the right culture, at the district level, putting in place the infrastructure, and at the state level and provincial level, setting the right policy context so under which PLCs can flourish. And I recognize there was also a question that I love. Somebody asked me about ESSA, and what does ESSA have to say about PLCs? So one of the underlying messages of ESSA is about continuous improvement, that we are, as a nation, committed to continuous improvement toward equity and excellence for all students, and we're not going to get it right the first time. We're just going to keep getting better. And there is a new definition of professional learning within ESSA, and we can give you that reference as well. I'm making a note, and you will see within that definition, it is really the definition of a professional learning community, that we think all of ESSA dollars for professional learning should really be directed at the school site to ensure that every teacher is a member of a highly effective professional learning community. And it says that it should be focused on the work that teachers do every day to help teachers improve. So I think those of you that are going to be affected by that, which is really everybody in the room, that it would be important to take some time and look at the new definition within the law. We also have something about the role and responsibility of district leaders and principals. I'll say a few things, and then Mike, I'll turn it back to you because you're our resident practitioner expert here. Again, in terms of the district responsibilities, it's the responsibility of the district to create those conditions that include a vision by the district of an expectations for PLCs, setting aside the time, making sure personnel exists to support high quality implementation, and that leaders have the knowledge and skills to be advocates, to participate, and to develop other leaders to guide PLCs. I think it's also important that district leaders and principals are able to walk the talk, so that means that they're involved in their own PLCs, and that each one recognizes that they probably have their areas where they need to grow and learn about the PLC cycle. Mike, what would you add that you think are important for district leaders and principals?
Well, you're exactly right. It's crucial to have the support of the principal, the superintendent, the Board of Ed, for them to really understand just how important it is for teachers to engage in this continuous cycle of improvement. And I realize, having worked in very small school districts and medium and large-sized school districts, the challenges that especially some of the small school districts face with funding and allocation. But there are creative ways, changing the format of a faculty meeting to allow for a professional learning community and sending out the information either through email or posting it on a shared drive, Google Docs, some way to do that But it is a challenge, but it's so important that the professional learning communities have an opportunity to work together during the school day. Planning, being creative with your schedules to develop those common planning times to allow teachers to be able to meet, building time in, which is part of the school day, maybe before or after school, in service days. It's just really, really important that the leadership support the work of the teachers with their PLCs.
Thank you. I think you're going to have a lot of people want to apply to be in your district after this.
Well, that would be very flattering if they did.
So let's talk a little bit about the teacher responsibilities when it's about PLCs. And let me mention that later on we'll talk about launching a PLC, because I know a lot of you had questions about, so where do I start? So I'm not talking about that now, but I promise you that we'll get to that. So in terms of a teacher committed to a PLC, I also have the responsibility to make sure I fill any of the gaps I have in terms of my own knowledge and expertise about the PLC in whatever PLC cycle that my school or district has chosen, and if we haven't chosen one, to study several and to bring that to the table, and together collectively you can probably develop your own as well. And then if we have a PLC, it's a responsibility as a teacher to invest deeply in the process, to believe in it, and to be committed to its outcomes. As a member of a PLC, then I need to be obligated to not only invest in the learning, but to apply that learning in the classroom and to take it all the way to the end, where I'm able to document and report the results of my engagement in the PLC process. Mike, would you have other expectations for teachers?
No, I think you really nailed it with that. And documenting and reporting the results, I think, is important just for everyone involved. It gives everyone a closure, if you will, on working with the PLC.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. How about if we give it back to you for a sec?
Sure. We've had some questions that came in, and I didn't want to interrupt you as you were going through the cycle, but one of them really, it was asked before you got to this point, and I know you addressed the point about individual and collaborative work with reference to designing the work of the PLC. And I wanted to go back to that because Michelle asked a question that is sort of the counter to what you described and how she can handle a specific situation. I think others might have, so I wanted to raise it up. She says, how would you handle a situation where the school's curriculum specialist, and I think you could insert any role here, someone is taking over this leadership of the PLC, but they're dictating and facilitating the PLC without the involvement of the teachers. And she says this is very problematic for the building's PLC effectiveness. Can both of you talk to us a little bit about how you might strategize in a situation like that to ensure that the PLC is holding up the integrity of its intent?
So I'll start, and Mike, you might talk about what you would expect people within your district to do if that was occurring. So I think the challenge is to ask, one way you might do it is ask the consultant for her definition of a PLC, because this doesn't sound like a PLC. So see if we're truly in a PLC or if we have shifted into something that is district mandated professional learning of some kind or curriculum development. But don't, that's how PLCs get such a bad name, is when we call something a PLC and it doesn't meet the definition. I would also then raise it with, if we have a school leadership council, and if the school leadership council is responsible for the big vision for PLCs, I would take the issue there. If I had a good relationship with my principal, I would take it there. I would, begin an honest conversation within the group and talk about what is she trying to accomplish. Maybe there's a different way to accomplish what she feels like she needs to accomplish with the group. The group can decide how to do that and then can say, if we can do that in this way, it can then return that time to the group to be able to conduct work as a PLC. I hope other people will add suggestions in the parking lot as well, how they might confront that. And Mike, what would you do?
Well, there's a saying that I use often in the district, and that is you cannot over-communicate. So building on what you said, I think the first thing would be is for the teacher or teachers to get together and say, what kind of outcomes have we had? What do we value? What do we think is important? And what do we want to continue with our PLC? And then to schedule time in a non-confrontational manner over coffee, tea, whatever, and to request time to sit down and to present their side, the teacher's side, to the let's say the superintendent or the assistant superintendent or supervisor of curriculum, whatever the position is, and have a dialogue, not so much a discussion, but a dialogue, meaning that both sides will listen to one another and try to see the value in what each side is presenting, and perhaps dig down and get to that the underlying reason, the first and second, I can't think of the term right now, but the learning, where you dig not just superficially, but you dig down underneath. And what's the underlying issue or problem here, and try to come to some sort of a resolution. And if the teachers have had their PLC in operation and they have had a positive outcome, I think they can present that in a very positive manner, and hopefully, come to some sort of a resolution on that.
I think that's really helpful. Another question that came in that sort of piggybacks on this from Alex, she's asking for some examples of norms that can help with accountability. So accountability maybe from the facilitation end of things and some accountability on the engagement end of things. Do either of you have examples that you can share? I know, Stephanie, you talked about this notion of building the norms. Do you have anything concrete and specific that you could share with Alex on this question?
Yeah, we actually did a Tools for Schools, or Tools for Learning Schools is a publication, and it actually gives guidance on how you facilitate the development of norms, as well as gives sample norms. So let me put that in the web link section as well. We have another book that's called Becoming a Learning School, and it has a whole section with examples of norms. And I think if you search on our website under Setting Norms, that you'll get a whole bunch of free resources that you can pull up from there as well. And I'd be glad to give anybody who wants it the Learning Forward staff norms. So I can give you that as well.
Super. I think that's helpful. We do have more questions, and I know folks are asking a lot of questions still. We want to get through a couple more slides, and then we'll make sure to get back to questions. At this point, I'm going to turn it to Michael to talk about the REL Mid-Atlantic's work with the Professional Learning Research Alliance, and he's going to give us some more details about that work that they're doing.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. First, I'd like to say I participated with the REL Mid-Atlantic Professional Learning Research Alliance for several years now, I think 5 or 6 years. And I have found it to be extremely valuable, and I've included in different districts, I've included other members of the district, of the leadership team, I've included teachers in this process. And in Monroe, we have a very similar situation where members of our team are all members of the PLRA. The PLRA really focuses on data-driven approaches, and it's an approach that can help school-wide education agencies, local education agencies, and also institutions of higher education increase their knowledge through this professional learning environment. And I referenced this before, how important I think that is, that I get to meet either online or in person, because we're a hybrid model, and I get to meet with educators from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware. We have members of the organization that are on the Department of Education in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. we have superintendents, we have assistant superintendents, we have principals, we have teachers, we have people that work in universities involved. This sharing of knowledge is what the PLRA is all about, and it really helps all of us to identify the common challenges and the opportunities that we have, and also to, share and exchange perspective and experiences. There are several goals, and I'll advance to the next slide to show you that. And you can see the goals there, and the goals really help us when we have these. We have twice a year, we have an in-person meeting, and we'll pick different locations so that it's convenient for different people. And with the wide range of participants, some of our attendees drive 5 or 6 hours to attend these in-person sessions, and that's how valuable they think it is. And then we also have our virtual side, where we have these somewhat webinar-type settings where we collaborate maybe monthly or bi-monthly on different ideas. And we find that there are common issues that are impacting all of us, no matter what state we're in. There may be slight changes between one state or another, but we find that a lot of these issues, it really impact all of us. Some of the research topics that the PLRA has addressed are listed here. I'm just going to talk about some of these, or each of these a little bit. The first one is professional learning data inventory. And there are several projects that are either currently going on or that have taken place. And I'm just going to mention some of these, and all of these projects are available if you go to the Mid-Atlantic or REL-MA site. But we've talked about and have engaged in work on online models of PLCs, the review of the literature, measurement instruments for assessing the effectiveness of PLCs, an evaluation of a district-wide implementation of a PLC initiative. We talked about how different school districts, whether it be Westchester, whether it be the Greater Johnstown School District, the Monroe School District, how different districts have implemented PLCs and the challenges and the opportunities that they have faced in their district. There's been a project on comparing different models of principal professional development, and also a professional development system in practice, just looking at different New Jersey districts and profiles. The second area is, can online learning communities achieve the goals of traditional professional learning communities, and what does the literature say? And basically, the literature, the study that was done by Dr. Cindy Blintz and others, are that the PLCs are teams of educators, most likely teachers, or most commonly teachers, who meet regularly, often during scheduled school time, to develop lesson plans, examine student work, monitor student progress, assess the effectiveness of instruction, and identify needs for professional learning. The online PLCs are teams of educators who use digital and mobile communication technologies at least part of the time to communicate and collaborate on learning, joint lesson planning, and problem solving. And then there is a partially online, a hybrid model of PLCs which combine online and face-to-face interaction. There was a study done of online learning communities. Can online learning communities achieve the goals of traditional professional learning communities? And basically, just parts of the summary talk about the internet and mobile communication technologies have greatly expanded opportunities for teams of educators to reflect and collaborate with each other and experts outside their schools and even outside their districts for learning, joint lesson planning, and problem solving. And these electronic platforms provide ready access to knowledge and resources without the usual limitations of time, space, and pace. And hybrid PLCs combine online interactions with the face-to-face interactions of traditional PLCs. So overall, the evidence is indicating that online communities of teachers can achieve the goals of PLCs. And it finds that the teachers who collaborate online and are engaged with the group develop a sense of community, improve their knowledge of subjects and pedagogical content, and intend to modify their instructional practices accordingly. So, and Stephanie, I'm going through each of these, but I certainly encourage any input you have on any of these different topics as well. I'll just jump in because I'll keep on going. But number 3 is another PLRA research topic is the measurement instruments for assessing the effectiveness of PLCs. And one of the studies identified 49 relevant instruments, 31 quantitative and 18 qualitative, that measure a range of teacher, principal, team, and school student level variables that assess one or more dimensions of PLCs. These resources will be available if you go to the REL MA site. There's a model which is referred to as the logic model that is used also to evaluate the district-wide PLCs, and that basically talks about inputs and investment, the staff time and the expertise that is needed, that feeds into the outputs, which is the activities and the products and their participation. So either meeting face-to-face or online, maybe an hour a week in a small group to work collaboratively on improving instruction and student learning, which then leads into short, medium, and long-term outcomes or impact, such as maybe teacher outcomes could be something like a greater focus on collaboration and openness to feedback, a positive attitude toward improving student learning. Teacher outcome could also be a mastery of subject content or an adoption of effective instructional practices, including an increased use of differentiated instruction. And maybe a long-term outcome could be a professional growth, including increased ability to lead and respond to learning challenges, increased job satisfaction, and a stronger commitment to the school's mission and goals. I mentioned the Monroe Township School District, and we use a software system called My Learning Plan. And to propose or to submit a professional learning community, there's a portion of this on the site that asks the teachers to name the project, name the members, to provide the dates, to talk about their, use SMART goals. And then I talked before about the norm setting, the listening, the decision making, how is participation going to be held. And then how does it align to district goals and objectives? And we use the Marzano approach for our evaluation system, so we have it aligned to the different domains of the Marzano system. And there's a checklist that teachers can use, as well as a narrative to talk about how they would like to see their professional learning community implemented within the district. And finally, comparing the effectiveness of different approaches to principal professional development, review of the literature, and just some of the key findings were that coaching-based programs can equip principals with skills relevant to supervision and management of staff. Professional learning communities can cultivate their ability to build and support professional or positive school culture, and coursework-based programs can support their role in promoting and assessing high-quality instruction. And mentoring-based programs can improve their ability to interact and collaborate with staff and stakeholders. I mentioned that our leadership team is engaged in its own PLC, and I believe that's important that we do that to model to teachers and to students that we are all involved and engaged in our own learning. So this year we're working with on a study of innovation in education. So we're looking at the work of Dr. Tony Wagner to see how we can implement some of those innovative practices in our district. And we're looking at the dispositions or the habits of mind mentioned by Costa and Calic as well. So we're using that to model the approaches within the district. There's this last slide gives the link or the website for anybody that's interested in finding out more information about any of that. And Stephanie or Elizabeth, certainly that finishes the portion that I had. I certainly welcome any input that you may have on any of those topics.
Mike, thanks. Just going to mention a few housekeeping things. I clicked on the REL Mid-Atlantic PLRA web link. Hopefully that opened for folks. That is also listed down below in the right-hand bottom corner web links box. You'll notice that our team has also been posting a lot of resources that Stephanie's been referring to. They're all there in that web links. You can click on those at your convenience. Might be good to do it before the webinar is over so you have those saved. But getting back to your comments about the work that the PLRA is doing here in the Mid-Atlantic, Michael, I think that that's a helpful addition to all of what we've been talking about for the last hour and a half or so, in that this work is evolving and there's a lot of investigation and research. We know there are lots of researchers on the line today. There's still work to be done here, and I think it's a real collaboration between researchers and practitioners to ensure, and practitioners who are action researchers, to figure out what are the best strategies, what are the best ways to implement PLCs. And it takes all of you to do this work and to go out there and share your experiences and talk about your experiences in settings like this and beyond, so that we can improve the way we do things.
So I loved the summary that you gave, Mike, and just identified a lot of the other sources of research and great examples of people who are in organizations that are convening and facilitating work around learning communities. I'm thrilled to see IES investment in this, and I really do think that our new administration in the Department of Ed under ESSA is really committed to this concept of collaborative learning, building professional capital, and focus on continuous improvement. So, and the Mid-Atlantic opportunity sounds like a great one. So I'm really glad you shared. I was just really engaged in listening to what you had to share, so okay. I wanted to hear more. So thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Sure.
I'm going to finish up. I'm looking at the time and recognizing that a lot of you probably wanted what's in the last 15 minutes, like, okay, what do I do? So in terms of when I'm launching a PLC, here are 5 or 6 steps, probably not many of surprise to you, and I apologize if you said, well, okay, well, I figured I needed to do that. But anyway, maybe I can offer a few surprises attached to the ideas. In terms of studying the literature, I mean, there is so much, and Mike just gave you a whole bunch more to look at. But I think in order to advocate, in order to be able to launch, you really need to have a strong foundation in the background. And so I think that's our first responsibility. Then I think the second thing is if you can find PLCs to observe and begin to draw your own cross-comparison about what you appreciate about the ones that you see and what you want to bring back to your school or to your system. We have an award that we actually give every year for PLCs, and you can find it. It's called the Shirley Horde Learning Team Award, and there's videos on there. It's on our YouTube channel, and it's great to watch these PLCs tell their story. Rick Dufour has a website called All Things PLC that has a lot of great resources as well. I also suggest that if your school or your system's not ready, that you find for yourself a regional PLC or a national PLC or a PLN. A lot of them actually go under that name, Professional Learning Network, when they're online. You reach out to your regional lab to see what they have to offer, and most of your professional associations are sponsoring PLCs right now. If you want to experience one online, the Teaching Channel offers and facilitates professional learning communities. It's a great one one of the ones that I'm aware of that's online. But there are many opportunities, and Mike even mentioned about you can start with like through Twitter and LinkedIn and join some of those networks, and they all contribute to our learning. Identify if you're not school-wide, look for your colleagues within the school who are committed to this work and share this common passion, and begin your PLC by studying PLCs. What do you want to propose to the administration? Or look outside your school across your district and see if there are teachers who teach the same thing as you and would be interested in it, and if you can get someone in district office to sponsor you. And then, again, if your administration still is wondering whether it's worth the investment, start small. Start with a grade level, a subject area, or a problem is another way of beginning your PLC. I want to find colleagues. We want to find time to help us really look at this issue that we're confronting in our school. I hope others of you will note in the parking lot other ways that you have found successful in launching a PLC. Mike, do you have one idea that you'd like to add?
Well, yeah, I have a lot. One, I'll just
I know, I'm just looking at the time. I'm sure you do.
I'll keep it short. Even back when I was a principal, we had a group of principals that would meet once a month, and each school would host a meeting, and that was the beginning of our PLC. But as you said, the best thing is to just jump in and start it.
Yeah. Then in terms of when you're implementing the PLC, what are some things to keep in mind? It's just having a learning cycle that everybody understands and is committed to. That's, and so that it doesn't become the complaint session or the lesson plan design meeting, that everybody knows when they come to the PLC that what the PLC is going to be about. Making sure that we protect the time and location. And I could tell you so many stories of districts that really invested in PLCs and didn't provide the structure, didn't provide the time, locations, and as a result, PLCs, don't exist in those districts anymore. Making sure that you have the data and the goals, that you examine data and you set your goals. And if you're new to this, try and find a coach, somebody to give you feedback, and just to continue to give you perspective on how you're spending your time and the results that you're getting from it. Mike, one idea.
Yes. Find someone in the team or on the team to be the taskmaster. Determine when you're starting, everyone gets a chance to speak, and when it ends and what the outcome or action is at the end of the meeting.
That's great. That's really, use those meeting norms to also help you move through the cycle. Thank you. And then I know there were a lot of questions about what do you mean, Stephanie, by documenting and reporting impact? So always go back to those goals that you set at the beginning of the cycle. What did you say that you wanted to achieve in terms of student learning, and how are you going to show that? So ask that question at the beginning. And what is the change in practice, in terms of teachers' practice that we're going for? And how are we going to collect and document evidence of that? If we get really clear on the goals, then what evidence we're going to collect should not be a challenge. And then somebody said, how do you, we have a lot of teams within the school, how do we continue to build the coherence? And hopefully within school-wide meetings, PLCs are reporting on what they've learned and the impact of what they've learned on their students, so that other teams are really interested in learning from those teams. Another way of assessing impact is if you're connected to a university and they have students that are doing research, invite an external researcher in to come in and collect information and tell the story from the outside perspective. Mike?
Band directors do this twice a year. They present, at least twice a year, they present a concert to show what their students have done. I challenge all educators to find a way to do that with their professional learning community and also students. Find a way to present to the entire faculty what they've done with the professional learning community.
That's great. I went to one sponsored by the Washington State Department a couple of years ago, and we had, they were poster sessions, and they had to show their journey and outcomes of their journey along the way, and what were the overall outcomes in terms of their school and their system goals for their PLCs. It was really powerful, and it was a great way for them to tell their story, and they had the opportunity to tell that story right in the lobby of the Gates Foundation. So a good place to tell that story. And then finally, just one reminder that the Standards for Professional Learning and everything on the website about the standards, just about all of it, is free and available to you. It is the foundation for all this important work that we're doing, and 35 or more of your states have actually adopted the standards into policy. They expect professional learning to meet the standards, and so it's always really helpful to go back in and review all, because the standards are really embedded in this PLC cycle. And so here's another great place to develop expertise and a resource that I want you to have about the standards. So kind of as we get close to closing, what were some of the big ideas that I hope you take away from today? That we do have evidence to support the potential impact of PLCs when we implement a process that we choose with fidelity, that there really is a distinction between a PLC and what I would call a networking group, and that's not to say one is more important than the other, but I think it just depends on the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And thirdly, that we have a lot of guidance today that tells us what are those critical components and responsibilities of systems in ensuring that PLCs do achieve their intended outcomes. Elizabeth, do you want to take us home?
I sure will. Yeah, we have covered a lot of ground today, and I thank you, Stephanie and Michael. I'll ask the group to give you a virtual round of applause now, even though we're still going to hear from you a little bit in this last question. But thank you for sharing your wealth of expertise on this topic. And I'm going to kind of do a few things in the last 5 minutes simultaneously, because I want to make sure folks have an opportunity to answer the 2 questions that are on the slide. Key takeaways from today's presentation. Our goal with this series is to ensure that folks learn something and apply it. So we want to know, what are you planning to do as a result of what you've learned today? So we'll pop those up, and I'm going to keep talking for a few minutes while you formulate some answers. I have a slide that has all of our contact information. I'm going to make sure you see that before we finish today. We are also going to encourage you to come to our future webinars. Our next one is in late September, and we'll be addressing the topic of enhancing the instructional program with creative arts. And then in October, our topic will be overcoming the achievement gap. So you can find the link to sign up for each of those webinars down below. And then before you leave, I'm going to send you out to a survey, and I'm going to encourage you to respond to that, give us your feedback on today's webinar and the series in general. We do value your feedback, and we want to make sure that we continue to improve the way we deliver information to folks out in the field. And so it's very important to us that we hear from you. I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to turn to the takeaways and the action steps that folks are typing. So Stephanie and Mike, please feel free to jump in on what you see here.
Well, one thing I love is when people say after I talk is that they feel affirmed in terms of their current practice. That makes me know that so many great things are happening in schools already. And if they then take away an idea of a value add to the work they're already doing, that gives me the greatest sense of pride in terms of the work that all educators are trying to do. And just appreciate everybody taking time to actually respond to both of these questions and make a commitment about what they're going to do and what they're going to take away from today. So that honors our time in organizing all of this for you all today. So I want to say thank you for that.
I would just like to say thank you also to Stephanie and Elizabeth. And this is so exciting to see what people are typing, that they're actually going to take what they've learned today and what they've heard today and go back and do something with it. I'm seeing multiple comments coming up on the screen about how they're going to go back, get involved in with a PLC back at their district or their school, how they're going to look at hybrid models, how they're going to publish something, they're going to research it, they're going to go out and get involved. So that's really rewarding and exciting.
And to that end, to answer a question that I see here and to reiterate what I said earlier, all of the information you see within these polls, I know that takeaways and the action steps you see others typing are great ideas that you might want to utilize yourself or build on. Though the archive of this chat will be available in just a few weeks, you should get an email that will tell you everything's posted to the REL website. You can share these materials with others who might not have been able to attend today, and you can reference these the responses that others have made to these questions we've asked today. So that really wraps up our time together today. I am going to take you through those last few slides because I want you to see how you can contact either Stephanie or Michael if you have questions that we were not able to answer today. I know both of them are willing and able to answer your questions and take you through any resources that we might not have been able to share today. So you see their information here. Actually, Mike's information is not here, but if you have questions on the PLRA, Cindy Blitz, who was in our audience today, you can contact her, or you can find more information about the REL Mid-Atlantic's work on the website or through the general email.
Yeah. Also, if I could, Elizabeth, if they have questions specifically about Monroe or anything that I could answer, if they send them to you and you forward them to me, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Absolutely, no worries. And this is the slide that talks about the upcoming events. We hope you'll plan to join us. And I would like you to take just a few minutes and go through our survey and then go enjoy your evening. We thank you all for being here with us today. Again, a virtual round of applause for Mike and Stephanie. Thank you both for taking us through this exciting 2 hours together.
And my thank you to everyone who participated today as well.
Yes, it's great. Thank you.
Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.